be hearing today. But to begin with, we're going to go to our first speaker, who is one of the contributors to Proud South. And it was really her words of wisdom that inspired us very much to create today's lineup of speakers. And she's going to be speaking to you about, um, yeah, the emancipation, the ideas, this whole energy of this movement, the dignity of this movement. And so Modupe Oloruntoba is, I think, based in South Africa at the moment, in Cape Town, I believe. And so she'll be speaking to you in a second. And then she will also be joined by Jackie May later on, I think. So Jackie will be perhaps joining you after you've started. So I'll hand it over to you, Modupe. Thank you for being with us. We're super excited to have you. Also, sort of open our minds to the whole afternoon because your words of wisdom have been very inspiring.
Thank you so much, Philip. Can everyone hear me okay? And is my screen visible? I believe it should be. Okay. Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you all today. My name is Modupe Oloruntoba, and I'm joining you from Johannesburg, where I live and work. I used to live and work in Cape Town, which was the birthplace of the World Hope Forum. Um, I what I do in my work is mostly around content and copy and strategy around those kinds of communications and marketing. But I really work to move African fashion forward. I consider that the mission of my career. And so I use my skills in the employ of that mission. I help with content strategy. I do content production support. Um, sorry, I'm seeing some messages. Screen is on small. Okay, I hope it's visible. Um, right, I do some content strategy, I do some production support and content, and I help facilitate the wider conversation around African fashion and its moving parts. And I do that also by contributing to the conversation with my newsletter, which is called The Fashion Operator. It's where I share and discuss the ecosystem's business news stories. I have invited a friend and colleague to join me today. Her name is Jackie May, and she is the founder of Twig, which is a digital platform for content, for learning, and for experiences that inspire and promote a regenerative, caring, and ethical lifestyle. She is based in Cape Town on the other side of the country, and she is a champion of local sustainability and slow fashion, whose work and lens I really value. I would like to thank Lee and Philip for the opportunity to share with you all today. I'm as excited to learn from the incredible group of speakers gathered here as I am to share some of the important work of some truly inspiring people in African fashion and some important signals showing in the environment in which they are operating. So in my essay for the Proud South book, I made some observations about mindset shifts that were affecting the reality of professional creativity in the global South, particularly here in Africa, where I live, and in South Africa, where I'm based. Um, these observations were around um, burst bubbles and realizations in the face of what I think are fantasies that people have had about creative work, and fantasies mostly created by the global north that actually don't reflect how professional creativity moves and breathes in our part of the world. I made some observations around clarity and discovery in this process, around shifting lenses and changing gazes, and really about fatigue and frustration with the old status quo of global creative influence being concentrated in the global north. I also looked at what might come next and painted a portrait of what I hope can be a creative future, of a possible creative future, one that would be sparked by questioning and curiosity, one that would shed imposed identities, a future that results from fighting the almost gravitational pull of Eurocentricity. So it was a picture also shaped by questions like why? Why this? Why not? Why wait? And by a growing body of evidence that people were asking those questions, and that in creativity in the global south, creative people were making bigger and better bets on home and on themselves. Parts of this picture depended on new systems for making, for distributing, and for experiencing creative work. Systems that would be built for now and for us, for here, in a way that reevaluates the current power dynamics of what I guess we can call cultural capital. These this picture, parts of this picture depend also on these new systems, these new ideas being spread widely and being adopted and implemented widely. I offered a view that the world has changed in ways that can generate these new system options if we will construct them and if we will dare to imagine them for ourselves, for the health of the planet and for a new world of creativity that we may never see without these changes. So for today, I asked whether we have truly begun this work. Um, are there any signs that these new systems are being created? Who is adopting them, what impact are they having, and what is the everyday reality here in creativity in the global south that is not represented by a few exciting but singular headlines about creative success, headlines that often don't really reflect what's happening for the majority on the ground. What is really changing? Do we have these new systems? Do we have seeds or echoes or building blocks of these new systems? So I would like to share some highlights of creative work, particularly in fashion, that I believe are signaling change. This is where Jackie will come in to join me, and uh, we'll look at some of Jackie's observations from her work at Twig. She has, I would say, a front row seat to a lot of this type of system change. And then I will speak a little bit about signals that I'm seeing in the wider environment where these designers and makers are operating. Jackie?
Hi, everyone. Modupe, thanks for inviting me to share some thoughts with you today. Yeah, I'm a journalist by experience and have spent most of my life in newsrooms and on magazines. And then I was dis very unhappy at some stage with the work that I was doing by just promoting global north, really, global north fashion brands to South African consumers, and decided to launch Twig, which is actually twig.co.za, Modupe, but and the brand is really about doing pretty much what Modupe is doing as well, and that is talking about African and South African brands that are working sustainably, regeneratively. The narrative is really grounded in South Africa and on the continent, and then through that we've run the Twig Sustainable Fashion Awards, and that has really allowed us to create an ecosystem of designers that we kind of we've got to know well, and who we try and support wherever we can through our network. And we have also, for the last 4 or 5 years, done Africa Textile Talks, which is looking at we kind of imagining a post-fossil fuel future, which hopefully will become sooner to us than we hope. Where we look at all the different types of fibers and textiles that are made on the continent, including biomaterials or regenerative ones, but also a lot of the traditional indigenous ones that have been in the making for centuries. And what else do we do? Those are the two big things. And then we we partners with the Mount Nelson Hotel in Cape Town, which is a Belmont hotel. And we have the absolute privilege of inviting 5 designers to showcase their work. And it's a very slow fashion show. The designers have one day dedicated to them. They have 2 shows of 2 hours each. And over the years, we've had now altogether 12 designers showing. And for them, it's a wonderful platform. It's very beautifully done, and the hotel invites journalists from across the country, from across the world to join us. And that's been a wonderful way of talking about African fashion, very artisanal fashion, and as I said, very slow. Yeah. And then anything else, Modupe, for now?
No, I think we can jump right into your examples, starting with Wanda. Wanda Lepoto is a wonderful designer here in South Africa. And Jackie, could you tell us a little bit more about why you selected Wanda as an example of what we're here to talk about today?
Yeah, sorry, I see somebody is saying that they can't get onto Twig. It's twyg.co.za. Yeah.
Yes, I
Wanda
put the
Lefoto
correct URL in the chat.
Thanks, Modupe. So Wanda is one of many designers in the country that is really working very locally, although and on the continent. And what I've loved by getting to know him and speaking to him and watching his work, he is creating the most beautiful community of people around his brand. And through that, he is not only talking about his own work, he talks about his friends and his community's work too. And for me, this is the most beautiful way of growing your, I hate the word consumer, but growing the people who will then wear and love your clothes is by including them in a movement. And we're seeing that more and more, and how people are wanting to wear clothes made by the designers who they get to love and respect. We see that a lot with Makosa and Tebi Magugu as well. You know, when I first started in following fashion, everybody wanted to wear a heritage Italian brand, you know, as they could afford it, as they grew up and got jobs and stuff. But that's changing. The local consumer wants to be seen wearing one of their friends' clothes, and that to me is a big shift over the last 15, 20 years. And I must say, I think as much as I hate to say this, but I think social media has had I'm going to put the name in there, has had a lot to do in helping this, because people can own their own marketing and distribution channels. And that's very powerful. It's very powerful to be able to do that. His name is...
I've just added it there.
oh, thanks.
Right, what can you tell us a little bit about Wanda's decision, because it was a conscious decision, not to show in the West? The image in the middle of the slide is actually Wanda at Milan Fashion Week, which I think was one of the last times that he showed in Europe. He had a sponsor there. I think that the show went well, but it was really more about the trade season and getting buyers on board, that I don't think just goes the way that it should for African designers when they go to Europe. So tell us a little bit more about his decision to disconnect from that fashion system.
I think, I think it's a lot of pressure on our designers. I mean, just generally, there's a lot of pressure when they have to go to Europe. It's very expensive, and to show up for those number of years in a row, it's hard. And I think so that wasn't his decision. I think he just decided that he wanted to make his own community proud of the work that he does, and to communicate locally. And I think the brand resonates with a local community, with a local audience as well. And I mean, that was as you said, it was a very intentional decision to do that. And I love the fact that he says, we keep looking away to looking out of the country or looking out of Africa for people who we should be admiring, but actually there's so many people here to admire, and to respect and to learn from. And I think it's that turning the eye back to us, back to who we are and what we make, that is so powerful. And I mean, Lee referred to that earlier as well, that the eye and the lens turning to the South, the proud South. And I think that is certainly what I think our designers and what we are experiencing here, and amongst the people who buy and wear local design.
Right. I don't have slides for our other two talking points here, but let's move on to the second signal or highlight that Jackie has to share with us today, which is the made to order model and what that is looking like on the continent. Jackie?
Okay, I can only really speak from my experience mostly in South Africa, but I did recently read and republish a story from The Conversation, which had a piece about from a researcher who had studied the West African designers who do, especially Ghana. Her examples were mostly from Ghana, but just how people are making to order rather than making mass or making to supply retail. And I think this is a really efficient and useful way of making clothes. You can create clothing only for the number that you need to make. You're excluding waste. You're also making for somebody's size. I mean, it's a little bit like the old-fashioned tailors, the made to measure tailoring. And I think sorry, we can't just show the work here. But that is a very promising and beautiful way of looking at of making clothes and the fashion system. The fashion system in South Africa is it's a dual system. We have the retailers and the fast fashion systems that are doing really well, and then we have our wonderful independent designers. And my fear is that the manufacturers and retailers are following the fast fashion model that we're all trying to stop, which is problematic. But yeah, we harass them, don't we, Modupe?
Yes. Um, yeah. Tell us a little bit more about the dual economy and how it's how we live in kind of two parallels where we've got the independent designers, but also the world around them that includes small one-man businesses, two-man businesses in urban centers, but also in peri-urban centers in rural areas, um, doing singular one-off tailoring. In townships, and a township is a peri-urban area here in South Africa, and how that ecosystem is developing, even as the more formal retail seems to be going in a different direction.
So yes, I think that's been as I mean, Wonder would be the designers would be a wonderful example of that. The independent brands we know, but when you go into the peri-urban areas and into the townships, it's really incredible to see the small operations that are doing amazing things. And what I know this is not fashion, but the not necessarily classified as fashion, but when you see tailors working in shipping containers making school uniforms, then there's something really interesting happening in this dual economy because they're not buying the people who do the brands that do supply the school uniforms generally are importing the clothes from the East. But here we have tailors in their shipping containers able to beat those prices, which is remarkable. So in any of the areas outside, especially outside the city centers, Modupe, and I suppose in Joburg and all the not only the the peri-urban areas, but there are a lot of small tailors doing high fashion, doing school clothes, doing repairs, doing fixes. Everybody uses them. People drive up there in their big BMWs and drop off a shirt to be fixed, as well as the person who is coming there on a taxi. So it's just incredible to see how it's an informal economy.
Great, thank you, Jackie. I asked Jackie to be here today because she works so closely with these examples of alternate systems that are developing, but also so that she can show you how people are actually engaging with these alternatives. We can come up with all the alternatives we want, but if people won't make the switch, then we won't really see the change that we need to see. So Jackie does the very important work of highlighting and documenting this engagement. And yes, I want to thank her for being here today as I shift to a few more signals that are more about the world that these makers and designers are operating in. Thank you, Jackie. All right, so we'll move on to some other examples now, where I do have some more images. Apologies, everyone. Right, so in policy and in funding, we are seeing some changes. Now, I realize this isn't so much creative work, but these are the systems that a lot of creative work depend on. So the changes that we're seeing in, particularly in institutional public-private funding in Africa, are some of the programs that you can see on the screen, which is CANEX. They have around $1 billion that they're investing in the creative practices across Africa. They've doubled that recently to 2 billion USD. There is HEVA, which is an East African network and fund that has just unlocked and just launched 5 million USD into very similar practices across film and other forms of creativity, but also including fashion and makers and people who work with their hands. And then there is the iDice fund, which is, I think, 618 million, which is in Nigeria and is being used to kind of bring a lot of people who work on their own, work with their hands, whose creative work is perhaps, I guess, offline, help them to digitize, but not so much in a standardized system, but in the ways that they believe will actually help them spread what they're doing and spread these other systems, these alternative systems. I think this is happening because these institutions are recognizing the role that growing the creative industries in Africa, in pace with the growing demand, there is growing demand, just the role that that can play in addressing youth unemployment on the continent. There's definitely red tape and bureaucracy to deal with in accessing these resources, but the resource gap is closing. And this is significant because historically, these institutions are the last people to notice and act on these shifts, the last people to see value in creative work. And this is happening alongside other changes like the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is starting to become operational. Other industries are making significant trade under it already. Fashion is yet to make significant trade, but the door is now open for that. All of these systems are imperfect. They are the establishment. They contain a lot of the principles that got us to where we are today, which is not where we want to be. But we're seeing change in those systems now, and I think that's very encouraging to see. So my next set of examples are around Africa's changing role in the production cycle. So a lot of things that have happened recently signal a larger changing of role for the whole continent. The Kantamanto fire that happened in Ghana, President Museveni's ban on secondhand imports in Uganda, and just the growing global visibility of the true scale of what was called just another part of the supply chain, but is really a previously hidden dumping problem that has now come to light and has come to light for more people. This is also happening around the same time that countries like West Africa's Benin are investing in their own cotton processing to move past just being a raw material supplier like so many African countries. Tunisia and Nigeria are collaborating to improve fashion production in both countries. And these are shifts that create opportunity for system change. But like I said, these are things that are happening in the established systems that have the issues they have, that have the issues that got us to where we are today. So these shifts are opportunities where we need crucial interventions to come in order to build differently than the global north, which is something I discussed a little bit in the essay as well. And then finally, some creative work here as well under the banner of Touching Heritage. So what I'm seeing happen, and it's a growing space, is more and more of a response to beautiful textiles that require hand processes. We're finding that the thinking and the mindset around the appeal of these textiles and around the appeal of these processes is changing. These are now things that people want, and we're seeing the desire for them grow in various ways. The first image here is of designer Lucanio Mdingi, and a scarf that he has made. This this is a model wearing the scarf. It's not Lucanio himself. Um, Lucanio did a number of scarves in some early collections that were inspired by his own ethos, but also inspired by his friend Nicholas Coutts, who is a young designer that we very sadly lost a few years ago to a tragedy. Nicholas's work was very much around hand-woven textiles, layers of tactility, and just creating a beauty that could not be a beauty that comes from just a completely different place than rote machine work and mass production. The second image is also Lucanio Mdingi. It's from an exhibition that he did around textiles. Um, I think this also included some work by Tatenda Chidori, who is also a textile designer, but really it's just again to show that these textiles, these handmade results that used to be seen as, I guess, lesser craft, where people wanted really slick and contemporary designs, are being elevated in the mindset of people who are interacting with this work. And they're being heralded and put up on a pedestal in a way that's changing how people are thinking around their desirability. Next, we have what looks like denim, but is actually just woven cotton, but is Funtua cotton made by a brand called This Is Us from Nigeria. So Funtua cotton is a local species of cotton in Nigeria. It's local to West Africa, indigenous to West Africa, and it doesn't have a lot of global demand, so there isn't much of an industry around growing it. But these designers took it upon themselves to interact with that which was from home and which was from their own indigenous background and from who they are and from where they come from. These designers also work a lot with hand dyeing in the Kano pits in Nigeria, where indigo dye is done by hand in several large pits across an area that um, was at one point not was at one point shrinking because there really wasn't much of a demand for these hand dyed garments, these hand dyed textiles, but is seeing a resurgence as the world rethinks around indigo and natural dyes, and particularly brands like This Is Us going back to those pits to support that work and to place value upon that work and place value upon its results. Um, Directly beneath that image, we have work from a brand called Ntatuoa. This is a South African brand, and the entire collection is hand knitted and hand crocheted textiles, sometimes with natural dyes, sometimes simply with the natural tones, but creating really beautiful work that there is truly a growing demand for, which I think is the hope signal that we're looking at here. Um, this is a designer who has recently been stocked in Merchants on Long, which is a very esteemed African luxury boutique in Cape Town. And it's a very small brand. She had some mentorship from Lucanio Mdingi, and some support from merchants as well in order to get to where she is able to show this work to more people and spread these methods into more wardrobes, into more people's thinking, into more people's circles of desirability, and how we think about how we think about what these alternate systems are producing and whether people want that or not. These designers are increasing the desire for these products, these outputs, these textiles, these clothes, which then creates demand for the processes themselves and for the alternate systems that they belong to, which I think is something very exciting. This final image is a piece by the designers Musso Maxwell, also South African designers, and they worked with a textile artist named Stephanie Bentham to create this beautiful woven textile and to create this pattern of cutouts that the tunic has and that are wrapped also with hand-woven textile. Um, it's a collaboration that did very well and saw a lot of attention. Stephanie Bentham, I believe, has also worked with Tebe Magugu on some of his knitwear, and it's just encouraging to see this work go into spaces where everyone believes that fast fashion is what people will want, that slick contemporary design is what people will want. And sorry, can everyone hear me still?
Yeah.
Okay, I had a message on the screen. And it's encouraging to see that not only are makers saying we want different, but the people they are making for are responding well to the difference. So where all of this leads to, there are many more signals like these in this room, even in this virtual room, in your work, in the work of your peers, all as we kind of face the daily tensions of choosing new pathways. So writing the fashion operator has brought so many questions around the choices that we make into focus for me, the questions that used to sit on the fringes of my thinking and are now at the center of my thinking, along with many other creative workers. African designers are caught in a tension between growing Africa's participation in existing systems and in fundamentally changing the systems that they're in with the influence of their alternative knowledge and their different values. There is a valid need and desire for these designers to grow and to compete in order to have strong, sustained operations that provide stability and provide employment, that preserve craft and can continue to preserve craft. Things that would transform the communities that they're in with these outcomes. But we know and want better than that, better than the way that the global north produced similar outcomes. We know and want better in terms of systems and how, and not just in the result that we receive. In fact, any pathway you choose, there's the established power dynamic and it just follows you into that choice. And it maintains some of the limits on your access to the resources that can fund and support this kind of change. And added to all of that, as a maker, as a designer, you're operating in a world where better methods need to spread, but total production, especially in fashion, needs control and needs reduced volume and needs that urgently. And without the dominant systems on board with that mission, it's left to you as an individual maker, as an individual designer, to find a way forward that puts in more than it takes out, that is regenerative and supportive. And without the support of those dominant systems, it's really hard work for these designers that sometimes seems insurmountable or unfair. But at the end of the day, what do we have and what does all of this amount to in terms of the alternative systems of making, of distributing, and of experiencing this creative work? I've concluded that to take steps toward these new systems, the sacrifices that these designers are making are really worthwhile. In review of all of this, I think I expected to see I don't know, a different type of signal, a different type of strength of signal. But as I look at the macro environment that these designers are in, where we have our economies that are struggling, we have volatility even in economies that people would not describe as struggling, we have the world splitting into groups of increasingly polarized values. We have the chronic overwhelm of feeling like we're all on a 24/7 disaster watch call. And I can see all of these things as stones that are getting stuck in the gears and slowing change down. But even with that as a backdrop, all of these signals, I think, say something encouraging, and they point to a universal truth that I don't think we can be reminded of often enough, which is that even though the world feels as though it's changing in ways that we cannot keep up with, or that we're just being carried along into the future, the truth is that we are creating the future. We are creating um, the reality that we step into tomorrow. And the people creating that are not just the most powerful. Hello? Am I out of time?
Yeah, we need to bring this to an end with this beautiful quote on the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We are very happy to understand more of the systems, but we also asked you to talk about your article in the book, where you have this beautiful quote on what is the new situation. And Philip, you can read it.
Well, I was just going to close. I think that's what Modupe was basically summarizing, is that you said, as the world looks to the South for more inspiration for and new stories to tell, we'll welcome their interest, but decline their terms and insist on ours. And I think that this shift that you've been writing about and talking about is really the lesson that the rest of the fashion and design industries need to learn. So we're very happy that you could open today's discussion with these important ideas.
We hope that
Thank you very
the house continues to develop the way it's going.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really all to just encourage us all to continue to act in all the ways that we can, small ways, big ways, experimental, imperfect. Every choice counts for co-creating this future. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Apologies for my camera issues. I'm not sure when it switched off, but it will not switch back on.
To everybody that this was the African voices. So this was literally the voices. It was
okay. Thank you very much.